and welcome back to Behind the Unicorn, a podcast all about how nonprofits work and how nonprofits should work. I'm Emily Davis. I'm the host of the podcast. And in this episode, we are going to be going on to part 4 of the strategic planning conversation for nonprofits. And in this episode, I'm going to focus very specifically on the strategic plan delivery and implementation of that plan. And before I talk about the 4th part in this series, I really want to go back to something that I actually missed talking about in the last part, which was all focused on the strategic planning retreat. And the thing that I missed that I really wanted to make sure I covered was about who participates in the strategic planning retreat. If your consultant has done their job in gathering the data, the stakeholder perspectives in the discovery phase, there is no reason for staff to be at the board retreat. Strategic planning is a governance function. It is the responsibility of the board to set the strategic plan and oversee the strategic plan, which includes your chief executive officer. Therefore, there's really no reason for staff to be there. One of the challenges to that is folks will say, well, we need staff there to share their perspective. Well, they've done that through input calls and through surveys. So at this point, there isn't really more input they need to give. The input they've given should inform the decision-making of the board with the executive director. The other thing is staff their role is operational. And if they are in a board governance discussion, not with any bad intention, they're just doing their job. But staff can pull the board into operations rather than keeping them at that higher level of strategic thinking, governance focus. And so I think there's some risk in that. And why does that matter? Well, board members, as I've said in other podcast episodes, board members tend to want to be involved in programs and services and operations. Very few people are excited about policy and financials. And so any opportunity to sort of derail and go over into operations and programs, folks are going to take it. It's hard enough to keep board members at that higher level of oversight. And so that can be a distraction, frankly. The other piece I would say, staff members generally have better things to do. If I'm facilitating a retreat on a Saturday, this is not time staff needs to put in. So being mindful of the time, resources, capacity, and also the various roles of staff and board and not getting them too mixed up. And, the retreat is really just another data point in information for me as a strategic planning consultant. So if I am saying to my clients, the staff doesn't need to be there, the staff doesn't need to be there. I really want the board to focus on the data that they're given, the conversations we're having, and staying at that 15 to 30,000 foot level. The other thing is you can get it happen where the board is actually starting to micromanage the staff in a retreat, a strategic planning retreat. And you don't want the board doing that either. So it's really just sort of in the best interest of everyone and the purpose and the overall outcomes of strategic planning to keep the strategic planning focus on governance, which is your board of directors. So, I said at the end of the last episode, feel free to, poke holes in anything I've shared. And I'm poking a hole in my own episode and saying, I forgot to make this point about who attends the retreat and who frankly shouldn't attend the retreat. Some retreats, there is even a place where it's board only and the executive director is not present. I'm not sure that always makes sense, but there are exceptions to every rule. Okay, so now that I've gotten that out of the way, let me talk about the actual plan, the narrative, the implementation tools, and how to implement and use the plan. After the retreat, as I mentioned in the last episode, I write up the notes from the retreat and get those to my clients within a week of the retreat. And I'm also writing the actual narrative of the strategic plan. And the narrative really looks like a playbook. So it starts with the history, the background. How did we get here in terms of the process, the situational analysis report, and then it dives into the strategic priorities, goals, and objectives. And in outlining the strategic priorities, goals, and objectives, what I'm really doing is breaking down that playbook. I start with priorities, which are those big bucket or umbrella themes that the goals and objectives are built out of. So they might include things like excellence, relationships, governance, culture, identity, financial sustainability. It's different for every organization, but I will develop an infographic with those priority areas and maybe one or two words to describe the goals under each of those priority areas. The reason why I do this is that it's super helpful in marketing and communicating the strategic priorities to, say, membership or donors without giving the full-blown strategic plan. I would never recommend anybody put the strategic plan narrative like the one I do up on their website. For example, somebody can just download it and make it their own, first of all. But secondly, it seems like a lot. So the narrative, when I write the narrative, it is very comprehensive. The last strategic plan I wrote was 53 pages. Now, the reality is nobody's going to go and implement a plan flipping through 53 pages of information, but I really care about being thorough in how I give people the information they deserve as a client. And what that means is I will break down as much as I can, as much as is reasonable. Again, this idea of a playbook. Here, under this priority, are your goals and your objectives. Here are things that you want to think about in implementing that. Here are resources you need. So it's a reference. If you have like a task force working on a particular priority or goal, they can reference the narrative. It's going to be the meatiest part of the strategic plan. And again, it's not realistic that's the only thing that people get. So some of the other things I share with clients are a snapshot, and the snapshot is really the text list of the priorities, goals, and objectives. And that's something that's like a quick reference tool, right? So you can access it quickly. The next is a dashboard. And this is something that I have sort of built out over time. It's an implementation dashboard. It's really great for overseeing the plan. And what that means, it's the way I do it is it's really just in a spreadsheet. And you lay out the priority, the goal, the objectives, timeline. When does this need to be completed by? Responsible parties, who leads this effort, who needs to be involved in the actions? What is the year-to-date progress? So what's our progress so far? What's our success outcome? In other words, how do we know we've achieved this objective? What's the measurement, right? How did we know we did it? And any recommended resources. The implementation dashboard also includes tactics. And the tactics are sort of the nitty-gritty to-dos that make up the achievement of the objective and then ultimately the goal. The board really, in terms of their responsibility, really lives within the priorities and the goals. And the staff really lives within the objectives and the tactics. So when I write up the strategic plan, the implementation dashboard, the snapshot, I focus on the priorities, goals, and objectives, and I may offer up a sample tactic, but it's really for the executive director with their team to identify what the tactics are at a staff level or a committee level, depending on what the goals and objectives are. It's really up to them to identify what the tactics are. And to be fair, if I'm not on the inside of the organization, which I am not, this is going to be something that the staff needs to take on for implementation of the plan. So I break down in the implementation dashboard, I break it down by priorities. So if there's 3 priorities or 5 priorities, whatever it might be. And then I guesstimate timeline and responsible parties. What's great about this is that it's an easily accessible tool to use to provide oversight to the plan, and you can change it. So one of the great things about a strategic plan is that you can edit it. You have something to edit, right? And so if things change, the timeline change, people who are involved change, you can put it all on the dashboard and make it yours. So big fan of the implementation dashboard. Yay. Then I also include, as part of the appendices of the plan, the situational analysis report, implementation resources, which I'm going to come back to, retreat materials, so any PowerPoints, handouts, the notes. And then I also include raw survey data. So it's at the end of the process where I'm delivering the plan that I actually hand over the raw survey data. I try not to do, I definitely don't do that beforehand, because people tend to get bogged down in their own analysis of the survey data and are not qualitative data research experts. So I try to leave that towards the end. So going back to the implementation resources, because I am a board governance expert, I love to be able to provide some of the implementation resources that boards would need to be successful. This is especially helpful when one of the priority areas is board governance excellence, for example. And so I'll provide examples of recruitment strategies, rotating policy creation and approval calendars, meeting facilitation tools. Maybe if funding sustainability is a priority area, I will provide tools on how to measure fundraising effectiveness. So again, I like to provide resources to help people implement the plan. So I've written the plan. I've given implementation dashboard, snapshot, implementation tools, all of those things, right? And that typically, I mentioned it last time, but I deliver the plan within 4 weeks of the retreat. So writing up that plan, having somebody edit it, and then putting it all together. From there, depending on the scope of work, there may or may not be a round of draft editing. Please don't ask 5 people to edit a draft of the strategic plan. Usually you need 1 or 2, and that might include the executive director, the board chair, governance committee chair, who's usually the vice chair, 1 or 2 people. Combine those edits. And I usually take them as suggested edits, because I've spent so much time with the information that sometimes things are redundant or they don't fit. And then I incorporate those edits and deliver the plan. In some cases, I have clients who want me to do a presentation of the plan, and some clients are good with the delivery of the materials. Either way is fine. It's just about what's in the scope of work and what's realistic. So the other thing I want to say is that one of the big challenges that organizations have when it comes to strategic planning is implementation, right? How do we prevent this from sitting on a virtual shelf? Well, there's a few things, and you really start off with a higher level of success in implementation and keeping the strategic plan, quote unquote, alive by using a more comprehensive process like this one. You're already ensuring that there's greater investment in actually using the plan. The other thing is, I actually write in the final section of the strategic plan narrative implementation recommendations. For example, provide a copy of the strategic plan to everyone involved with its implementation, board, staff, committees. Update the plan annually, at least. Share the plan as part of orientation. Put the strategic plan priorities or goals, for example, at the top of every board meeting agenda as a reminder of those priorities. Conduct quarterly reviews using that implementation dashboard. One thing that I learned years ago that I really liked was the idea of board champions, meaning there is an individual on the board who is really the holder, they're the champion of that priority or that goal, for example. And so, again, if you have a board governance excellence priority, the governance committee chair would be a great person to be the champion. Oversee, how are we doing? Where are we in implementation? What do we need to change? What doesn't make sense anymore? What can we take out? What have we accomplished so that we can celebrate it? Quarterly reports, even on each priority area, is great. And the champions can just type up some bullet points about how things are going. Certainly, using the strategic plan as part of a board self-assessment and a CEO evaluation is critical. And, one thing that people forget to do is celebrate wins. So when a goal is completed or a priority is completed, to celebrate that, to honor that. Some priorities can be ongoing, right? Like nonprofit excellence. Hopefully, if that's a priority, you're always working towards that. It might show up in your next plan. Nothing wrong with that. Those priorities help you determine what you're going to focus on as much as what you're not going to focus on in terms of a priority at that moment. So keep in mind that with implementation, the other thing is things can change. Staff changes. The unexpected thing I always tell people about is COVID, is that, you hope that an organization prepares for some sort of unexpected interruption in the organization, but most of us did not see a full-on pandemic coming. So that's not necessarily something somebody could include in a strategic plan. It is now. We could probably include it now, but back in 2018, 2019, no, even arguably part of 2020, it would have been tough. And we learned a lot because of that, right? Is to always have backup plans and contingency plans. So, implementing the strategic plan is a board function in terms of keeping it on the front burner, keeping it alive, making sure there's check-in points, making sure that everybody is invested. And then when there's hiccups, there's delays, there's stalls, asking the right questions in overseeing the plan. Why has this been a challenge? What do we need to change? How do we need to change it? I really recommend in an annual board retreat that there's a refresh of the plan to look at what needs to stay, what needs to change, what's been accomplished. And that's a great place to combine with a repeat or ongoing board governance training. Again, a skilled facilitator in these areas can be really helpful. If you liked your strategic planning consultant, bring them back to do that annual review. More often than not, they're going to love to do it. So That's something to think about in terms of annually updating. Yeah, I think the board and the staff work together through the relationship with your chief executive and making sure the strategic plan is alive and continues. The last thing I will say is every once in a while, I will have a client who wants to hire me on to help support, like technical support with implementation. What does that look like? Again, a good example might be financial oversight. Okay, what reports do we need? How do we get those reports? Can you help walk us through, what nonprofit financial reporting looks like? Can you help us through the board recruitment process? We want to revamp our board recruitment process. Can you coach us through that? Most of the time for me, when I'm done writing the plan, they've gotten so much information that they just usually want to use the resources they've been given. But on occasion, I'll have people ask me to stick around to do technical assistance, which I don't mind doing. It's a nice transition into getting the plan up and running as well. So the other thing I'll say about implementation that might be helpful is using committees in implementation of a strategic plan is really helpful, not just strategic planning, but the organization in general. And there's really two different types of committees. There's board committees and there's organizational, or they can be called program committees. Board committees are run by board members and they report to the board. Organizational or program committees are typically run by staff and they're operational. And if boards sit on those committees, they're working for the staff, not the other way around. Great. Oftentimes when a strategic plan is done, an organization will go, well, I don't know that we have the right committees to do this work. Well, there's a great concept called zero-based committee structure. And what that is it can vary anywhere from 2 to 5 years. You basically wipe the slate clean in terms of your committees and determine what committees you need to get the work done of the organization. Arguably, you always need a governance committee. You always need a finance committee. But there might be other committees. Fundraising committee is another one that is usually a staple. But there might be other committees that you need or you don't need. So a zero-based committee structure just basically says, let's start over and decide what we need. And we create committee descriptions and recruit people. And usually you're not totally starting from scratch because you have contacts with people who are doing that work or who want to do that work, including staff. But it's a really nice way to kick off the implementation of your strategic plan. A side note about that, if in your bylaws you list what standing committees you must have, you're limiting yourself in terms of making changes that you need to your committee structure. So I would recommend not listing any committees in your bylaws. You legally don't need it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't give you flexibility. So that's sort of an aside. But zero-based committee structure is a great tool to use to set your organization up for success, not necessarily adding more committees to what you already have, but sort of if we were starting from scratch, what would we need to implement this plan for the next 3 years? So that is the last element in the strategic planning process, is the strategic plan narrative, the actual written document, which I put sort of the kitchen sink of information in. And because I don't want anybody saying to me, you didn't give me enough information. I've never had that problem as a consultant. If anything, I give too much information because people can get kind of overwhelmed. So I have to balance it out, which is why I do an infographic, snapshot, implementation dashboard, and then implementation resources. To me, looking back on a healthy strategic planning process, this is what works well. I continue to stand by the credo that strategic planning is a process and not just a document. And I'm talking about not-for-profits specifically. For-profits do things differently. Not that it's right or wrong, it's just different. arguably, I think for-profits could learn from this process as well. So, in conclusion, this was the final episode in this series. I will come back with another podcast episode in the near future. In the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, if you find this valuable, it would be awesome if you would share the podcast with a friend. I'm on Spotify as Behind the Unicorn. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Behind the Unicorn. There's 2 Behind the Unicorns, by the way. One is for for-profits, actually, and this is for nonprofits. So just look for the image of the cute little unicorn. That should do it. So Spotify and Apple Podcasts, Behind the Unicorn. And then on YouTube and on Substack, it's Emily Davis Consulting, and Behind the Unicorn is part of that. But I would love to hear your comments. I would love to hear your questions. I really would like to have dialogue in addition to sharing information out. My hope is in the near future, I will have some guests on. It is not for a lack of ideas for guests or people I can't wait to talk to. It just hasn't happened yet. So I can't wait to launch that element of the podcast. But yeah, share this widely. I mean, there's so many myths about nonprofits and particularly about strategic planning that it is my mission to debunk. So help me on that. Have a little movement towards debunking myths about nonprofits. Until then, thank you so much for listening. I really hope you got a little nugget out of this, and I can't wait for the next one. Have a great day.